Brooke Grove's life was already full of accomplishment as a highly trained psychotherapist with advanced degrees in clinical psychology, marital and family therapy, and clinical art therapy. But her life took a sudden turn when she found herself floating above her body in the ICU. In this episode, Brooke shares her near-death experience and remarkable journey to the other side, where she encounters beings she refers to as the Angelics, and even received a visit from her unborn children at the time. Using the gifts she brought back, Brooke now offers a unique blend of intuitive art and science to help others heal. Be sure to check out her full bio and contact details in the description below. I am so grateful to have had this conversation with her, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Here's Brooke. Welcome, Brooke. Thank you for being here.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad we finally get to have this conversation.
Yes, thank you for your patience.
I like to ask my guests, I want to get a full perspective of who you were before your NDE. What was life like before your NDE? What did you believe? What were your thoughts on the afterlife?
I was a very different person. I had been an artist as a child and was really called to creativity, yet it had been really shamed and kind of frowned upon in my family of origin. And so I took my creativity and really poured it into other outlets. And one of them became understanding human behavior. So I was really oriented to psychology, to understanding the mind, and really the heart, although I wouldn't have articulated it that way at the time. However, with this passion for the social sciences, there was also almost a dogmatic disdain for religion, as I had been indoctrinated as a young child into Catholicism, and it had been used to really shame my gifts, my intuition, and whatnot in my family. I understand that's not for everyone, but in mine, it was that way. I come from a Sicilian family, so that culture was very much part of it. And so I was really this agnostic, borderline atheist person. I did believe there was something. I had felt it as a child and been really connected to it. Yet because it didn't fit the prototype of God that my family believed in, it had really been kind of shamed out of me. And so for that reason, I began to somewhat see science as a replacement for God. It is where I went for my answers. It is what I was passionate about. It's what I dedicated myself to. And interestingly, science is what ultimately brings me back, but it's not what I could remain oriented to after my NDE.
You said you kind of knew, you kind of had a connection.
Mm-hmm.
Did you show any gifts when you were young, and did you express those gifts to your parents?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of why I had these really firm belief systems about how they were. It was based on lived experience. So as a young child, I had an intimate connection with the earth, and I would tell my family, I saw angels, in the yard, or I had this connection to this motherly energy that I believed was Mother Mary as a young child. And while they believed in Fatima and they taught me all these stories from the faith, it was blasphemy to them that I would say that I would have these experiences of God. Like, it was all under the umbrella of what you got from the book or you were taught from the priest. It wasn't your direct experience of God that was validated. And so at an early age, I learned to not talk about that. My first definitive psychic or intuitive gifts came on noticeably probably around 9 to 12. And I sometimes would fumble and disclose things to my parents. The clearest example I recall is when my paternal grandfather passed. I was 12 years old, and the song Yesterday came on by the Beatles, and the phone rang, and I felt very sick on my stomach. And I put my hand up and told my mom to pause. And I said, "He passed." And my mom said, "Who?" And I said, "Grandpa." And the phone rang again, and she picked it up, and sure enough, it was her aunt. And she's like, "Your dad just died." And my mom looked at me as if I were a demon. Like, she was
Whoa.
disgusted and sent me to my room. And I remember kind of being in this weird in-between space that would become familiar to me many years later. But it was this piece of having felt the spirit
Hmm.
cross over, and this joy of this homecoming to this realm that I couldn't contextualize, but I could feel. And at the same time, this immense horror and kind of disgust my mom had for me speaking this out because it defied her way of being and knowing.
Wow. That's unbelievable that you had that experience. I've heard that from several people. They witnessed or experienced their loved ones passing before, as they happened, and before the family got the notice. That's wild. So I would love for you to dive into your near-death experience and go into your story. What happened?
Okay. Well, it's 2010 when my NDE occurs. And I had been ill for about 4 years when I started writing my first master's thesis, which interestingly was on the wounded healer, this whole expression of someone who's been through trauma becoming a healer and how does that impact them. I was writing about that. And as I was doing it, I start getting ill. As I'm expressing these things that I have suppressed for so long, my body becomes sick. I went to therapist after therapist, telling them I have a feeling my history and what I'm studying are impacting my body. You have to understand in 2006, even in psychology, there wasn't a big emphasis on the mind-body connection. Okay, that was all
Okay.
to come after my experience. So I went from doctor to doctor saying, I'm having these very physical manifestations. I believe there's a connection. Everybody told me that couldn't be true and that I was sick. And they were diagnosing me with all these different conditions. It began in my lungs. It was chronic obstructive pulmonary disease first. Then it was Wegener's granulomatosis, which is an autoimmune disease. And then it was another type of autoimmunity. Then it was lupus. Then it was rheumatoid arthritis. All these titles being thrown at this disease, but never the same one twice. And a diagnostician myself, I thought something was off about that. There's at least some consistency typically in nomenclature. And so I choose to go back east to Hopkins, as they were the leading autoimmune research center in the world at the time. And my family happened to live right by the hospital. So I'm going east to go to that experience. And as I'm preparing for it, I start getting really, really sick. And again, the symptoms were very sporadic. So at this time, I remember my joints were locking up. I was inflaming. I was having lung issues. The pain was ineffable. It was so severe. And so I call my treatment team back west and say, I'm not going to be seen for a while. What do I do? And they insist I take my medication as directed, which ought to have been fine. However, in the misdiagnosis, they had missed that it wasn't just my kidneys and lungs and joints compromised. My liver was already compromised and failing. So when they instructed me to take my medication, what they missed, because there was a treatment team of 3 different doctors, they were supposed to be communicating very clearly. They missed that there was Tylenol in multiple products. So the liver's already compromised, and then you put too much Tylenol in there. It might not have hurt a healthy person, but the state my liver was in caused a fatal combination of Tylenol products. And so that took the liver out. And because the liver was already so damaged, it then took the kidneys and the lungs as well. So in a matter of moments from taking a small amount of pills, I'm now in systemic organ failure. I remember none of this. I remember being in ICU and looking down at my body. So I'm basically coming out and being pulled up, and it was this like almost childlike, playful, jovial, like, ooh, look around. Oh, look what colors they're wearing. And oh, this looks like the X-Files. And I'm like having fun with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, I look down at the body. And though it's barely recognizable because I'm so swollen from the bile coming out of the liver, there is a moment where my consciousness recognized the body it sprung forth. And there was this sort of in-between of caring for this body and also feeling this gravitational pull above and not caring, like holding space for both. So there was this desire to go to the body and a desire to just get away. And ultimately, the stronger force, the energetic pull, one, and I'm catapulted up, up, up. And the best I can describe it in language would be into a space that's like a cosmic womb. It's just this beautiful, the only thing that comes close image-wise would be NASA's photographs, like the most high-res 4K, these beautiful pockets of light, pockets of darkness, star-like entities and angels and feeling states. Like everything is felt. There's no words. There are no sounds in the traditional expression of them. Though I will say the way that the light and the vibrations moved, there was a musical quality to it. Like you really felt like you were in this like sound pool, but it was really the speed at which vibrations expressed themselves. And once I was there, I was greeted by the most magnificent 3 lights. And to me, they appeared as this beautiful emerald, this beautiful amethyst, and an equally beautiful ruby. And this was very tender and touching and deeply embodied for someone that doesn't have a body at this moment. Like it was visceral, palpable how I felt these lights. And this is because, David, when I referenced experiencing angels or expressions of God as a child, they appeared to me in those exact colors. So when I saw them up there, it was like an aha moment of this is real. What I've been connecting to is more real than anything down there. And they know me and I've known them, and it was always right and it was always okay and nothing to fear or be ashamed of. And so they really held me, and I just delighted in being reconnected with this like primordial energy that was also part of me. And so I stayed with them for what seemed like a significant amount of time. I was in my NDE for approximately 3.5 days in human time, although when you're on the other side, there is no time. So it felt like this really infinite, expansive experience, yet on the ground, it was about, a little over 72 hours. And so I'm with those lights, but at the same time, I'm feeling this pull to this much bigger macrocosmic light. And this light, I really, really wanted to taste it. Like I wanted to be with it. And yet there was some, I don't want to call it trepidation because it's a very human word. There's no polarity in this space. And yet, because I was comatose, it might have varied for me from persons that flatline or have like a more traditional NDE experience. There still was this awareness that I could go either direction. Like I could go back to where I came from, or I could go into this light. And while some part of me wanted so much to continue being held by this love that I felt just emanating from this bigger light, there was another part that felt kind of called to stay with the angelics and perhaps go back. And you have to understand, they don't communicate at all in our language. It's just kind of like your consciousness thinks or feels, and then boom, there's an instantaneous knowing, or the consciousness reverts into another direction. And so it's all felt. And so on some level, they felt my trepidation or they felt my hesitancy. And they let me know that light is made up of all of the light. And you are part of that light. And so the knowing was that we were fractals of this source light or this creative light. And I could go back to that. That was entirely okay. Or I could go back in the other direction where I felt called. And they were somewhat normalizing it's okay to feel the desire for both. You are both. And so it was made known to me that if I chose to go into that light, I would stay with that light and then eventually split again and have another experience. Or I could go back to the body, I could go back to this incarnation, and I could do the next level of my work. And there was no human language, so it wasn't like they said mission or purpose. Yet they did give the felt sense of, you've done a lot of the groundwork. And if you choose to go back, you can finish that. And it's going to change the expression of this light next time you meet it, and next time you come back to whatever other expression you take on. Or, you just stay with it. Well, as a complex trauma survivor, the last thing I wanted to do was go back to this light or this expression and suffer more. Yet there was a simultaneous knowing that if I chose to come back, there was more pain awaiting me. And yet the angelics made it very clear, we've been with you since the start. We will not leave you. You are strong enough for this. You came for this, and you're not alone. Look around you. There's all these other expressions of light here, and many of them are partially on the ground with you now doing this. And you're here to support each other. Yet again, they speak more in myth and symbol than in human language. So I didn't have a way of understanding what they meant in timelines. I've come to understand in the years since that they did allude to me. It would be nearly a decade of deep suffering before I would understand this relationship to the other lights and be able to step into my purpose. Okay. And that, again, some of these things, they become clearer when we're on the ground and synchronicities occur and things unfold. And so I ultimately chose to come back. I was given a choice. Not everyone's given a choice. In my case, I was. Again, I was in between, so that might be part of it. And I say, well, how do I get back? Like, I don't really know what to do in this situation. And again, it's the intention and the alignment to the vibration that does everything in this space. And so they told me, just look for the light unlike any others. And I'm like, okay, everything's light. So now my consciousness is spinning around looking for this clue. And as that happens, I see these other two lights, and they're quite curious and they're a little bit different. So I stay with them for a moment, and I notice the angelics and the creator light held me. They were ineffable love that held me. This other light I was curious about and I wanted to hold. And it was also so curious that it made me even more want to go back to the body. Again, you just are consciousness. So I wasn't analyzing it in that space. So I follow the light back. This light, unlike any other, ends up being this pulsating, horrific yellow light that shines very differently than all the others. And so I focus on it with this curiosity for these other two that I just saw. And next thing I know, I'm catapulted back into the body. And the first thing I see through my left eye is a flashlight. They were shining a bright yellow light in my eye at that moment to check my vital signs. And so I'm suddenly from this beautiful, loving space in this body that I didn't understand at the moment, but I was strapped down to the bed. I had a PICC line going into my brain. They had thought I was potentially brain dead. I had a 1% chance of survival. I'd been read my last rites. So I'm intubated on top of that. And now I'm trying to communicate, not knowing that I can't communicate. I can't move my body. And so there was this instantaneous dichotomy of having come from the most ineffable cosmic love and being held in this womb to suddenly back into a broken body and the inability to communicate.
That's intense. I mean, to go from one extreme to the next and then back to the other extreme. Like, how do you integrate that experience after that happens? I mean, it's so big.
Yes, it is. It is. I was very fortunate because, again, at this point, I guess I was in like my 13th year of studying psychology when this occurs. And so I had a baseline of like how to work with traumatic experiences based on how I had helped other people. Suddenly I'm locked in this body and no one knows I'm there because, again, they did not expect me to wake up with cognitive functioning if I did wake up. And so it took quite a while to actually get their attention. I had to communicate through blinking my eye. In the first few days, when a nurse noticed I was compulsively blinking my eye, she realized I was attempting to communicate through the one thing I could move. And so then we developed a system where she would say yes or no, and we had one blink, two blinks, to answer the question. And when she realized I was there and I was cognizant and I was okay, then it was, some normalcy of, okay, well, they know I'm here. Someone's going to explain things to me and everything's going to be okay. But the truth of the matter was I was in a foreign hospital with doctors that did not know me. All they saw was Tylenol, toxic amounts in the liver. I have a trauma history. I had been a drug addict when I was self-harming in high school. And so the first thing my family does is give them the old story and start to collude it with the here and now. So I did not understand at that moment that my after effects from my NDE were already working. Okay. But I start noticing that everybody's kind of walking on eggshells and acting kind of funky, you know? And that's when, without being able to communicate or talk, I'm like, they're treating me like a suicide, but they're saying it nicely, like on the surface, but their energetic expression is judgmental, it's shaming, it's toxic. And so as a human, my first response then becomes, I need to communicate that that's not what happened. I need to get them to understand that I don't understand how I got here and I
Mhm.
don't understand what's going on. And so it was really difficult. And had I not had the empathy and the know-how through my former work to kind of be in these very difficult places, it would have been all the more traumatic. You know, I see people now who for 10 years hold these stories in because of the container that they wake to. So I was very fortunate to have skill sets, but even then they weren't enough. Like I wish I'd had more. And it really came down to being so scared in ICU and realizing I'm still seeing these red and green and purple lights and they're not going away now. It's not like intermittent blinks like before. They're constantly there. And so I basically said to them, if this is real and I'm not going crazy, because this is a legitimate concern, you know, from my scientific oriented part of my brain, I'm checking my orientation, which in psychology, that's time, person, place, situation. If you're oriented times 4, you are typically not psychotic. You are not going through an episode. So I'm checking that, but at the same time, I can see these lights. I can see this stuff on top of people that I didn't know what it was at the time. I now understand it's the field and their quantum energy and their light bodies. But at the time, I thought they gave me really good drugs, David. I was like, I'm coming off some really good drugs, because the closest thing I could compare it to is those of you that have done plant medicine or any kind of psychedelics. When you're coming down, there's that like filmy residue that it leaves before the drug completely evaporates from your system. And that is very much what I was seeing. And I didn't understand at the time that no one could give me any drugs. My liver had failed. So I was completely clear of all medication. And interestingly, the field would get stronger and stronger. So I eventually said to the light, if you're real, you've got to help me, because I can't talk to people. They can't hear me. I'm still intubated. And even after they took out the intubation, it was 3 days before I could speak. So I worked with the light, and the light basically became my ally and my support system in the in-between state where I couldn't yet reach out to people.
How did you get the message across to the doctors that it wasn't suicide? How did they find out eventually?
Once they took the intubators out and whatnot, and the psychiatrists and the psychologists come in and they do all of their tests, like I've passed their tests with flying colors. And at that point, they're like, well, what do you remember? And I'm like, I just remember excruciating pain. I remember calling my doctor. I remember taking my medicine. I didn't take too much medicine. You
Mm.
know, like, and all the doctors were like, she's not suicidal, you know, like, we're not sure what happened. That's when they started to say she was misdiagnosed because we didn't understand the livers in there. And so they start rapidly testing. But at that point, the damage is already done. I've been, you know, kind of scapegoated and was the black sheep of my family for being the artist, being creative, being intuitive. And then I struggled in the wake of childhood abuse and trauma to kind of fit back into their system. And part of how I did it was by being an overachiever, by, you know, being the person who went and got their doctorate, by being the one that was validated by science. And suddenly both of them were failing me because the people that were trained like me were coming at me very aggressively. And I knew
Mm-hmm.
what they were doing because I'd been trained the same way. They were discerning, but at the same time, there was no empathy. If I had genuinely attempted to commit suicide, you would hope the first thing that person wakes up to is empathy. In my case, all I woke up to was shame.
Wow.
And, you know, that's such a polar expression to what the creator gives us on the other side, no matter what our path in this life has been, in my experience.
Wow. Yeah. You went through a lot.
Yeah.
I have so many questions. Okay, so I want to start with you leaving your body. Okay. When you're leaving your body, can you see like all of the doctors and everybody working on you? Could you see like the waiting room, your family? Was there any of that going on while you were leaving your body?
When I was leaving the body, yes, I could see the ICU room. Okay. And that's why to my consciousness, it looked like an X-Files episode. Because if you've seen, like, prior to the pandemic, we weren't indoctrinated to be used to doctors in like full hazmat suits and all of that. Right. In my case, because of the damage of the organ failure, they were wearing full on protective gear. So when my consciousness is looking down, I remember thinking I was either looking at like The Simpsons, like Homer in the industrial camp where they're wearing all that stuff, or or like some sort of um, X-Files episode. Because again, it kind of looked like Scully all in like her gear taking care of someone, but there were all these doctors around the body. And so I was focused on that and what they were wearing and just like this curiosity. And then all of a sudden it was like instantaneously I was out of there, like just catapulted, like super, super fast. The consciousness to me did move at like the speed of light. Like all you had to do is think, move, and then you were like, boom, on the other side. I did not see my family. One thing that I did pick up on at some point while I was over there were the amount of people from different faiths and different ways of being that were praying for me. When I came to, I made a comment to someone about, oh, there was a Reiki circle and there were Baptists praying for me and the Catholics prayed for me and somebody read me my last rites. And I like went through this whole list and they were like, how do you know any of that? And I'm like, oh, I felt it. And so, and who knows, that might have had a big influence on why my consciousness kept feeling this pull back, because there was this connection. There was also a nurse, his name was Nick. And when they finally got the intubator out and I don't have my contacts in and I'm trying to make sense of what I'm seeing, I needed something. And so I like muttered, Nick, like with my new voice. And he like jumped and looked at me and he's like, how do you know my name? And I had a pen at that point because I couldn't speak well. And so I wrote down, you were always in here. You were always praying. And he was like blown away by that because he never expressed it to me, but he to me was an ally because I had felt his energy from afar.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So I want to go into what you experienced while you were on the other side. You speak about the angelics and these beams of light that you saw. Did the angelics have form? What was it like on the other side? What visually did you experience? I know you said it was like a NASA photo, like really crystal clear. And I know you're trying to put something non-physical in language, and I know there's probably not a lot of language for it. But as best as you can describe, like what did the angelics look like? Did they have form? Were they did they look like people, or was it more of an energy?
In my case, it was definitely more of an energy. I've talked to so many experiencers and I work with so many that I do feel that somehow it seems to mirror who we are as an individual, how they present. Had they presented as winged beings to me, I don't think it would be that comfy. My mind or my consciousness might have fought it. For other people, that could be soothing. For me, they presented as color, very, very intense color, as I've described. Yet why I term them the angelics is that particular frequency was at a much higher vibration than, say, the lights that I saw on the way back into the body, which I later learned were the auric signatures of my children. Okay. Those lights had a very soft light. It wasn't pulsating the way that the angelics are. And even in this field now, the angelics move at a very, very quick frequency. Like you blink, you miss a lot of what's happening because they're going that fast. The source light, I wouldn't say it was that, I don't want to say frenetic, but that's the more human expression of it. Like it's very intense, all of their light. And so that light was a little bit more calm in the sense that it was more stoic. Like it wasn't moving all over the space. It was the center of the space. And everything else kind of co-created with it. The best way, perhaps visually, to describe it is if you were to take, let's say, NASA's Instagram right now. You took NASA's Instagram of like their top 50 photos and you put that in a kaleidoscope and you just spun it super, super, super fast. That's probably what it looked like. Because it's all moving at this wild speed, yet everything is in co-creation with the other force. So if I focus in on the ruby red light, I am basically in resonance with that ruby red light. So in a way, that ruby red angel and I start to mirror or become one with each other just through the synergy of the vibration and the resonance. And that is why if you think or feel something in the company of these beings, there's an instantaneous knowing. You know, in this realm, we try to always make sense of what we're sensing. But the reality was the sensation itself was the intelligence. And
That
there
makes
was
sense.
no questioning of that. It was just, and the peace that comes from trusting the felt sense, again, we don't have a word for it. It's so beyond what people associate with awake or enlightened. Like it's quantum fields beyond that. It's really like suddenly the purest vibration is love and you are part of it. All of the other experiences, all of the, the shadowy stuff, the dark stuff, it's not there. There's no possibly program for it in that space. Even the portals of black or the voids that I saw in the space were exciting. They were moving, they were dancing with the light. Like everything was in this very synchronistic dance, and it all light and again, all love, like this extremely high vibration and infinite intelligence. Again, just curiosity is instantaneously met with an answer. And so that was very, it was almost like curiosity was encouraged, which in this realm, I hadn't had that experience with my family of origin. And even science, they want you to kind of follow their dogmatic perspective, even though that's not really science, but that's a whole nother thing. And so over there, the fact that like this playfulness and this curiosity is very childlike. I will say that like there was this joy, this jovialness that came from it that you don't often, when you're told about the creator or God or whatever in this space, you don't get that pure childlike joy with it often in the story. And in this space, it was like all of the light. It was like we were a bunch of children and we were playing together and it's all in love and nobody's competing. And we're just there to encourage each other on and love each other. And that was so illuminating and so refreshing and recalibrating to my system.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's interesting that you say how they showed up to you. It's like, depending on what your spiritual landscape is, that's how they'll show up. And that makes sense. That makes sense why some people see Jesus or some people see angels or see loved ones. I guess it's whatever your consciousness needs in that moment so that you can receive the information. Is that right?
I believe so. I mean, again, we're still, the consciousness, the mind itself wasn't in this experience, but consciousness being in relationship with the mind, it makes sense that some of that programming is still within the soul. And having talked with experiencers from around the world for the past few years in my work, I see that over and over again, that there's some element of the human that seems to be in the story and that grounds or helps normalize it for them. And so I didn't have like ancestors show up in my NDE the way that some people express it. I didn't have a life review. A lot of people find that to be a staple. I did not have one. I have many friends that have had them. I did not have one. From my experience, there was no judgment. I have had friends that went through, every single event with the creator. I didn't have that. It was more, for me, the emotionally corrective experience of you are loved just as you are, which isn't what I received here. And maybe that's the medicine my soul needed. So that's what they gave me there.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned the two lights that you saw that had a different glimmer to them than the other lights. Yes. And you said that you found out later that those were your children. How did you discover that? How did that show up for you?
That was again divine timing and the language of spirit. You know, a lot of my journey since I've come back has, for better or worse, has been on spirit time, meaning, you know, they'll reveal when they want to reveal the next piece of the puzzle. That said, I was really struggling to go back to my PhD. I was so close to the finish line. I already had my candidacy, the title doctor. All I had to do was defend it. And yet, every time I tried to go back to my dissertation, which was very clinical, very, you know, the old me, I would get sick. And I had been completely recovered from all of this, and yet I got sick. And so I was like, oh, I just need some more time. Go back, get sick again. Third time, oh, I just need some more time. Get really sick. At that point, I had been told I would never have children. I had been told I couldn't get pregnant. My organs had been too damaged. My body wouldn't support it. You know, all of these prognoses had been applied to me. Okay, I was going to have a short lifespan. It was going to be difficult, all these things. Well, I kept defying everything they were saying. It never occurred to me I would defy the pregnancy prognosis too. And so as I'm struggling with, do I try to go back for my dissertation a fourth time? I find out I'm pregnant with my now 9-year-old son. And so I was devastated by that at first because, again, I didn't think I could be a parent. And I had been parenting my degrees for so long that they had become very enmeshed into my identity. And I was really focused on still getting it done. And so I was a little bit torn up by that. And then I started to really feel his presence. And he's an intuitive, and his gifts started coming on. Like, it was interesting because I'm pregnant with him and I had to seek out experiencers because this was before I was active in the community. And I was like, I'm pregnant and I swear it's an intuitive because I have new gifts that are coming on and they're not mine. They're very masculine. So it feels like I have a male intuitive, you know, within me. And, you know, some wonderful people, my now friend and researcher in the NDE community, PH Atwater, she did a session with me and she was like, yes. And she told me all this stuff, all of it's spot on about my son here and now. He even presented with us at an IANDS conference, her and I, a couple of years ago. But that said, when he was born, it was a difficult birth. When he finally comes out, I'm going through all of the emotions and my gifts are activated and I've got all these doctors in the room, which again is a trigger for me based on my history. And so I'm doing my best to stay grounded. And when they go to pass him to me, all of a sudden he just beams that exact shade of indigo that I had seen on the other side. And you know, I was only 3 years out of my NDE at this point. I had had no training in energetic work or anything. So I didn't understand at the time. It's very rare for a baby or a newborn to show their full aura. It's usually developing. But in his case, it was almost like, it's real, Mom. Like, here I am. I told you you hold me. And so I held him. And, you know, it wasn't until his brother was born 4 years later that I saw the green light. And then suddenly it was like, oh my goodness, they were the lights that called me on the way into the body. And it's fascinating because my eldest is a starseed. He's classic, you know, in all of his gifts and his presentation. And then the one that presented as green, who I named Leaf in honor of that, he is an earth seed. I mean, he couldn't be more earthy. And so they became my balance. They became so much of what brought me here. I gave my eldest a Sanskrit name for the heavens, and I gave Leaf, obviously, a Viking name for the earth. And I always say they helped me bring heaven to earth. They kept me here when I didn't want to be here. And they each in their own way have been medicine, one teaching me how to be a child of the stars and communicate that way and be empathetic and be in alignment because he was born that way and it's never been shattered for him. And I get to nurture that with him. And then there's Leaf, who's like, it's cool to be an earth seed. It's easier. You know? And balance things out. And it's such a joy to be able to parent these two polarities that I also carry within. Leaf is very me, the scientist, the person that sees things as, you know, there's a definable, verifiable way. And then there's Dustin who's like, no, like everything is limitless, everything is possibility. And so they were excellent teachers in that particular way. And my eldest, actually, when he was 3, I'll never forget this story. I was reading to him in his room, and again, I knew he was an intuitive. I had all of these verifiable occurrences, but the most clear one happens when he's 3 years old, and we're going through our routine, and I'm telling him a story, and at the end, he's like, "Do you remember the stars?" And I don't want to be leading, so I'm just like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Where you chose me." He's like, "I'm glad you chose me, Mama. I came here, I chose you too." And I was like, whoa, because here's this kid who I basically was like, yet my family couldn't hold or support that. And look at the journey that led me on just to come back to that beautiful, crystal clear intuition that's embodied and trusted. And he has it. And time again, I see kids coming in like that, and what a gift. So it's just an honor to share the earth and this incarnation with people that are coming in fully intact and ready to do the work.
Are they both intuitive or just your oldest?
Just my eldest in the cosmic sense. I think everyone's intuitive, but it's a different expression. So.
And has he shown any clairvoyance of any kind?
Mm-hmm. When he speaks with his guides, because I was indoctrinated into religion at a very young age, and I was in parochial school from 3 to 18, I'm very sensitive to teaching children to be a certain type of way. So even though I encourage his gifts when he brings them to me, I don't enforce him doing any kind of thing. It's all his ebb and flow and what he wants. And so I do work with my own energetic field all of the time, and I meditate all of the time and do yoga as well. And so when Leaf was a toddler, my eldest, unbeknownst to me, was always watching me in the room doing my energy work. And I hear him out in the hall, and he goes, "Watch." He goes, "She's going to turn it purple. Now she's going to turn it green. Oh, look, that one's red." And so he's like naming. And so then I started like playing with it and like distorting it, and spot on, that kid was right about everything I was doing. And of course, Leaf was like, "She's not doing anything." So there's these two very different expressions. But yes, and when the pandemic began, D was only 6 years old. And so I was walking him home from school, and I was very upset because we were going through a major family shift at the exact same time that the pandemic occurs. And so I felt like extra responsible that they had to like go through these monumental life things at this very young age. And I knew his sensitivity. So I was attempting to speak to him as an adult and in language he can understand, but not overwhelm him. Well, he puts his hand out like this because I'm about to go into my soapbox. And he's like, "Spirit says it is the great undoing, Mama. Everything will fall apart so we can rebuild it. It's what we came here for."
Oh.
It's like keeps walking, and I'm all like, I wish I could be that firm in my knowing. I'm like, "Okay, buddy, can you coach me?"
So pure, he's so pure and untouched by the world. It's so beautiful. Yeah. You also mentioned you called them Aftereffects, and I'm assuming that's the gifts that you came back with after your NDE. Do you mind explaining what those are?
Yeah, so when I first woke up, as I described, there was this moving field on top of everything. And it moved very, very fast. What I began to notice right away is that it shared some sort of relationship to emotion. An example I can give you is there was this particular doctor who would always speak the way he was taught. It was very evident. He was like a textbook. He'd speak to you very clinically, very coldly, very matter of the fact. But he would be telling me my prognosis, which was not good. They believed I needed a liver transplant to survive at this point. And so he's telling me my whole prognosis and how grim and awful it is. And as he's telling me this, his lungs and his brain are like, cigarette. I just need a cigarette. I can't wait till I get a cigarette. Just get done this so I can have a cigarette. And so I'm sitting there like, and I just blurt out, "Go take a smoke." He looked at me because, again, you have no discernment when this just like comes on. And he looked at me like, what? And then I'm like, oh, he thinks I read his mind. But I wasn't just reading the mind, I was reading the energetic field. And it was the same thing with the suicide thing. Like, there was this nurse that was really, really mean to me. And finally I, said something to her like, why don't you just say it? And she's like, what? And I was like, I feel it. And then she's like, people that take their lives don't deserve to live. And I'm like, well, at least you've said it,
Wow.
but this is the kind of thing that, like, before it was like an empath, you had a hunch. You kind of knew something was being felt and not said. But now it was like I was downloading or I was receiving what was behind the curtain. And I now had to kind of hit my own brakes and not repeat it or not respond to it. So that was one of the things. Medical intuition, I didn't understand that yet, but I would have certain people come in and I would see like patches of black, like on a certain organ, like diabetes presents a certain way. And so I would see like these weird blotches, and I didn't understand that I was seeing the disease in the body. Later, I would come to understand that. That becomes a definitive part of how I help myself heal, because as I'm sitting in ICU, again, I'm a skeptic by nature. Okay. I was a scientist. So even though I can see this light emanating from my hands, and even though I can see these angelics, I still don't trust it. And so I want verifiable proof that this is something and that it works. And that's when they started guiding me to use my own hands on my own organs to help accelerate the healing. And as that grew in its intensity and my prognosis went from very, very awful to you're a miracle, we don't know how this happened, it's spontaneous remission, there you go, out the door, there became this awareness, whatever I'm seeing and whatever kinship it shares with emotion is medicinal. And it's obviously coming from some aspect of the body that defies normal perception. But if I can see it, then it has to be something that is concrete or that is very real. And fortunately for me, science was already opening up and finding vernacular for that as quantum physics was suddenly coming into its reign as one of the favorite children of modern science. And so I couldn't feel safe in psychology at that moment, but I could bury myself into what I was finding in neuroscience and quantum physics. And suddenly there was validity. Suddenly it was, you're not seeing something fake. You're not making it up. It's what the mystics and the yogis, and the great minds of the past have described. You're just seeing a realm or a reality that's beyond matter. But it is that reality that makes everything else up. And so it really was light moving and light and the vibration that things pulsate when they're embodied or when they're material. Because even something like a computer or a cup, it has a pulse point, vibrationally speaking. Okay. So I began to understand that it was almost the geometry of light that I was seeing, and that light could communicate, and that when you could see that light, you also had the ability to alter it. You had the ability to receive it, and you had the ability to manipulate how it moved or how it lands in your system. And while that was terrifying in the beginning, it ultimately became very, very empowering.
Are you practicing as a medical intuitive now?
No, I dabbled for many years just on self-healing. I left psychology, and then because I was having such a hard time grounding the light that I saw, I would have a really difficult time. Like, for instance, when I went to my first NDE conference, I didn't know that when people like me come into community with each other, our vibrations just go way, 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 way high. And so I didn't expect this. And I go there thinking I'm going to get more grounded and I'm going to have like these nice embodied human experiences. Well, I went in without any energetic boundaries because I didn't understand that at the time. And I go into this, it's 2012. I go into this huge ceremony of Mayan elders and Tibetan monks, and they're doing all of this stuff for 2012. And all of a sudden I'm seeing everybody's stuff. I mean, there were probably 400 people in that ballroom. And as they're doing the ceremony and it's energetically releasing things from people, I'm just seeing it all. And at that time, I don't think I understood that you could see an energetic attachment, or that you could see that people who were courted by ancestors or whatever. To me, it was like I was having a psychotic break.
Wow.
And so I ran out of there just a hot mess. And thankfully, because I was studying transpersonal psychology at that time, I had people that were really adept at understanding the energetic field and all of that. And they worked with me to help me come back down. And then through friends, the more I gently disclosed slivers of what was going on, the right people would just fall into alignment. And so I met shamans and medicine people. They were the ones who told me right away, oh, you've been initiated by the light. Oh, this is what happens when you hang out with the light for a long time. And, you bring back its gifts, and this is how you ground it, and this is how you work with people. And basically, I had to be a laboratory on myself to learn how to ground certain gifts, ceremonies that would help with other things. And then through trial and error, I started speaking about being a trauma survivor and then having these mystical after effects, and how when I went to the literature, there was nothing. They basically bypassed. They would say, okay, 7% of adults will commit suicide after an NDE, 21% of children. Okay. And they would acknowledge that, and then they
Whoa.
jump over to the good part. And here's me kind of like still almost in that population, like struggling with suicidality, also being a therapist and knowing that every therapist I went to was pathologizing my experience. Suddenly, that's a massive gap in care. You have people that have legitimate gifts, but they do not feel safe to go to a scientist and disclose it. Not everybody has access to go to Peru or wherever, like I did, to study shamanism. And what do? And why aren't we looking at that 7 to 21%? Why isn't that a part of what we're discussing here? And so I started pairing my understanding of mystical experiences and all I had learned through quantum physics, neuroscience, shamanism, anything I could get my hands on. I started pairing that with integrative multidisciplinary psychology, meaning clinical, transpersonal, mind body, neurobiology, and offering sessions to people that had had mystical experiences and needed healing from it. So say, for example, plant medicine was coming into its heyday at that time. Well, there's great ways to do plant medicine and there's not great ways to do plant medicine. Okay. And
Right.
unfortunately, there's not always a container, and people don't always know what is the safe way. And so I started seeing a lot of people who potentially could have had a very healing experience on ayahuasca, but the container wasn't there, and they were basically still spilling and flooding all of this stuff, and they picked up stuff during the ceremony, and it was all still going on. And so they looked as if they were having a mental illness or a mental health crisis, yet the reality was they just needed to have everything cleaned up and all of that stuff sealed and then be brought back down here so that they could access the higher plane but still be embodied. Okay. And so through trial and error, a lot of the things that had worked on me as an experiencer also worked on these populations. I started seeing the symmetry between all mystical experiences, not just NDEs. And once I started speaking out about this gap in care, about how I didn't feel seen by the literature, about PTSD and mystical experiences, my practice just sort of formed itself based on those talks and people finding me and reaching out. And that's just what I continue to do. I continue to work with trauma survivors and experiencers of all types and find modalities that are the fusion of science and spirit, and how they can then utilize both to heal themselves and then be in alignment to the service, which typically is what calls them to the mysticism.
Wow, that's such important work that you're doing. I didn't realize that there was such a high suicide rate for NDE experiencers. And is that for the same reason as people like who maybe go to a plant medicine ceremony and don't integrate the work? Is it because they come back from these profound experiences and then don't necessarily know how to integrate their experience into this world?
I think that's part of it for sure. The culture of silence is a huge part of it too. A lot of persons, like I do a lot of re-embodiment ceremonies, meaning if I find out someone's an experiencer, and sometimes I have people that have experienced like 3 NDEs and yet they've never had any integration, I'll do a death ceremony a re-embodiment ceremony, a rebirthday ceremony. Even if it's just between them and myself, you're still giving a ritual. You're still giving an honoring to that experience. Most experiencers, they are catapulted back into their old life, and there's no recognition that that person died. The person's gone. Yes, you have some connection to it, and quite often you go through ego death because you want to just jump back into that role. To me, that's like one of the hardest parts, and why we have such a high suicide proclivity is the world wants you to jump back and be that person. The world wanted me to put the white coat on and be a doctor. The world wanted me to stay at the top of my class and, do those things. And I attempted to do what the world wanted for a while, but all it did was remind me I wasn't that same person. And one of the dangers of NDEs that people often don't understand with suicidality, if you've been held by a loving creator that passes absolutely no judgment on you, if your experience of the other side is not the way religion is, there's not black or white, there's not right or wrong, it's just love, you don't fear death at all. In fact, most of us long for death because it's going to bring this peace. And so if your on the ground life is awful, you can't speak of what is happening to you. If you have significant after effects like me, it becomes a lot easier to just say, I don't want to be here. Take me back. And not even feel pain about that, because again, from your experience of the divine, there's no judgment. And so it's hard for persons that haven't been there to understand. But again, you just want to go back to that divine love. You don't want to know all of this suffering. And I feel that's part of why, we go through these massive integration journeys, but I feel like the community bypasses it by and large because they want to share that beautiful love and light. They want to share that vibration that's so palpable and transformative. But the reality is, to me at least, being human is really, really hard. And if people who have touched the divine are struggling to do it, if those people still want to leave, that normalizes how much harder it must be for people that haven't even had a taste of the transcendent. I feel like it's super important not to negate those very real circumstances.
Absolutely. So, what do you say to someone who's touched the divine and, they're on this planet and they're having such a hard time existing as a human? And they're like, well, I might as well just go back to the divine. Like, what do you say to someone in that space?
Well, for me, it's typically not about what I say. That's why my first 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the type of session, is always ceremonial in the energy field. They do not see me. I do not work on Zoom or anything like that. And they're all over the world. So they could be in New Zealand while I'm working here in Southern California. And so I go into that space, and with the light, it's not me. I'm just kind of a conduit for it. With the light, we go in and work in the different parts of their system that are really struggling to be here, and we move everything that we can. And then when we get into the psychology portion of it, the integrative portion, that's when I describe to them, if I'm able to, as clear as I can, what I saw, what occurred. I typically will write down notes just to verify things, since again, this is out of the box. And if you've never done anything like this, it helps the human to be like, oh, you moved your foot at 5 minutes and 10 seconds. Because if they're in Australia, they're impressed that you knew they moved their foot,
Yeah.
So there's some remote viewing that goes on for validation. Okay. And then once they understand that I've seen these parts that they can't express or articulate, that's when the words and the language comes in. And, it might be something like, okay, so to your soul, you've tasted that, but to your root chakra, for 53 years, you haven't wanted to be in this body. So suddenly now you've got a soul who can access all of this, but your heart doesn't even want to connect down here because your experience of Earth has always been bad. Okay? So now we have to go in and more with the mind, with the consciousness, we're going to reauthor that story. We're going to allow how bad it sucked to suck. Like we're not bypassing that. Like it sucked. And not wanting to be on Earth for 53 years, that's awful, right? And then you taste something transcendent and you want that right back. But ultimately, your soul chose to come back to this body. And that denotes that your soul has something to do here. So what is this holy messenger? What is this pain here to communicate? And when we start to shift the language and the receptivity to pain, not to be a burden, but to be literally an angel communicating where light can't get in, suddenly it's a whole new dynamic with persons. They feel empowered and they start to see the darkness as a prerequisite to the light.
A lot of people say that we choose our suffering and we choose our challenges when we incarnate into our bodies. Is that in alignment with what you experienced on the other side? Can you speak to that at all?
I didn't have, in my NDE itself, I did not have that type of knowing. What was communicated was that my soul wanted to do that work. That was very clear. Like your soul is strong enough to come into these dense, difficult situations and continue on. That was communicated. It wasn't until later, I had many spiritually transformative experiences during that dark night of the soul in the first 7 years following my NDE, because I kind of was full throttle. I'd be all for my NDE and, oh my gosh, Aftereffects, this is so fun. Or I don't want to deal with that. Let's use something low vibrational to turn it off, because you can turn the gifts off with low vibrational substances. That said, because I kept oscillating between these extremities, I ended up having a few spiritually transformative experiences that would reorient me back towards the light. And it was during those experiences that I had more of a dialogue with spirit, where it was like, well, why do I have to keep going through this? Why do I have to keep suffering? Like, why does this keep repeating? And is my karma just like profound suffering forever? And they made it known to me that I had the ability to let go by my own willpower, my own free will. And I find their understanding of free will more interesting than my understanding of NDEs from the experience, because it's just fascinating how they offer it to us. Yet I had the ability to clear mass amounts of karma in that moment, if only I would release them instead of operating from the story. And so there were certain things that in these spiritually transformative experiences, I was just like, oh yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. And because I aligned my intention, I sincerely didn't want to do it, with my vibration. And then I took that vibration and aligned it to my behavior by choosing not to do it or engage it. Those things cleared instantaneously. And yet other aspects that I have suffered with, that karma is paramount to my dharma, meaning I have to keep working through it in order to fully step into my power. And an example I can give you there is, while they took certain things from me, like I said, I don't want to be addicted to this anymore. Take it. They did. Okay. But there were other things like my PTSD. I didn't want to have complex PTSD anymore. I truthfully don't want to have it now. Okay. But at the same time, my PTSD, even to us having this conversation, I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you had it not been for the fact that when I was receiving NDE stories, I had never heard anyone talk openly about having all of this light capacity and these gifts, yet at the same time struggling profusely to be human and going through, mental health challenges or whatever. So PTSD, even though it's not around the clock like it used to be, in a way has become my ultimate teacher. When it flares, now I'm like, oh, okay, if the body's speaking it for the mind, I've missed something. I haven't been as cognizant as I need to be. And then every time I go through these flares and I integrate them and I learn from them, I'm able to come back into community with more medicine, more things to alchemize, more things to offer, and just even being open about it publicly. I've found so many people that can't afford to work with someone, yet they feel it in the conversation, and that helps uplift them. So I've never gotten a black or white, yes or no, you can definitively change this, or this is how soul contracts work. But there's always been guidance from spirit that when you're ready to release it, you will. There's so much that we try to force in this realm, and it's really about surrender, not willpower.
Surrender, letting go, and allowing.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, I had a friend ask me the other day. He was like, well, if you have a soul contract, right, and you choose a life of suffering beforehand, and
Mm-hmm.
then you incarnate in this body, if we have free will, your human body and experience doesn't know what your soul chose. So, how is that free will if you've chosen something beforehand and as a human, you supposedly have free will? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, it is an interesting question, but the reality is, I think when people think of soul contracts, they think of like black and white, like you're gonna go
Mm,
here and this. No, it's a gradient. Everything's a gradient. It's just like the light body. It appears in multitudes. So there's always potentialities, and I do concur that our souls, our oversouls, the part up here, which is really what's separated from creator, and then the soul is more like what's in the body, what the body remembers of its mission or purpose. But the oversoul does seem to resonate or choose what's going to give it the greatest opportunity for expansion. you know but is it black or white? No, there's variability. I could have gone and put the white coat on. Maybe I would have ended up with another NDE in order to orient me back on path. I don't know. Each person is so different, yet it is fascinating to comprehend and just ask these questions.
right. And it's not black and white, like you said. Yeah, yeah, it's just fun to think about. It's just so much fun. This stuff really excites me.
It is. It's all fun. So much fun.
Is there anything I missed or anything else that you'd like to share before we head out?
No, I've enjoyed what we've talked about. I like to just kind of go with the flow, but it's been fun to discuss these things today with you, David.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here and sharing your story and your gifts and your perspective. It really means a lot to me, and I know my listeners and my viewers are going to really appreciate it as well.
Thank you so much for having me and receiving me with openness. I appreciate it. Congratulations with the channel and best of luck. I look forward to hearing it later.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
David.
All right, bye.
Bye.